I'm going to be talking about the physical science of stress and anxiety in the brain. I've always been fascinated by the nervous system and curious about how something as abstract as emotion or anxiety can be seen and made tangible by physical parts and processes of the brain. Everybody has experienced feeling afraid or nervous. Maybe you're watching a scary movie or going through a really scary presentation. You started sweating or shaking or feeling numb, dizzy. This is a normal thing to us that can happen. We're used to this, but I want to explain specifically through this project what is happening in the brain and why. Okay, so a little background about how our knowledge of this has kind of developed over time. So it goes all the way back to Cicero. He was one of the first people to connect the idea that feelings of anxiety and fear is more than just a troubled mind and that there was a physical aspect. He called it troubled mind and diseased body. He was one of the first people to actually study anxiety disorders and classified them as ailments, but he didn't actually explore the physical science of the parts of the brain. Then in the 1930s, scientists Cluvy and Busey did monkey experiments. So they were kind of studying the effects of the amygdala, a specific part of the brain responsible for the fight or flight response, in these monkeys, and it kind of paved the way for future studies in that area. And also then what we have today, so our technology has advanced so much since then. We have MRI and PET scans where we can actually look at images of our brain and see which areas are being used for different activities. We can differentiate what it looks like for the brain to be thinking or processing versus feeling emotions. And we also understand how the nervous and endocrine system are linked together, as well as the limbic system, which I'll mention in a minute. And then an overview of the nervous system. It's divided up into two major parts, the peripheral and the central nervous system. The central is your brain and spinal cord. The peripheral is pretty much everything else, all of the nerves throughout the rest of your body. The limbic system is in the central nervous system. It's a set of structures in your brain. Some of the most notable ones are the hypothalamus, which is your link between nervous and endocrine system, which is your hormone regulation. The amygdala, again, is that fight or flight response center. The thalamus processes sensory and motor information that's coming in. And then your striatum terminalis is kind of that automatic alertness when your body's preparing you to act to a fearful stimulus. Here's kind of a summary of the process. So there's a car rushing towards you as you're walking across the street. Your thalamus is going to say, hey, there's a car coming towards you. Your amygdala is going to say, this car is a threat. And then your hypothalamus is going to release all these hormones, making you feel afraid and alert and ready to act. Your striatum terminalis increases your alertness. Your fight or flight is activated. And you're able to control your body to jump out of the way of the oncoming car. Adrenaline is released during this. You will have an elevated heart rate and respiratory rate. Your muscles might feel weak and shaky. Your cortisol is releasing glucose so that you have the maximum amount of energy available. You're feeling anxious and stimulated. Your whole body is being affected right now in order to keep you safe. Here's some instances when the equilibrium is kind of out of balance. So there's Urbach-Wiethi disease, which is genetic calcification in the brain. It damages the amygdala and the person is unresponsive to normal feelings of fear. Anxiety and PTSD, the amygdala is said to be overactive. So it's saying everything is a fearful stimulus even when it really isn't. And then a damaged amygdala can happen with injuries, and it also makes positive and negative memories harder to form. These imbalances, however, can still occur outside of a diagnosed medical condition. For example, CRH causes the kidneys to release cortisol, an anti-inflammatory, regulates glucose, and it destroys pathogens during a fearful stimulus response. And GR is its downregulator, or it stops having it produced. So when there's too much cortisol in the body, like your job's really stressful, you're working all the time, it actually causes inflammation. The CRH is causing inflammation. And that can lead to a bunch of other health problems, and it affects all of your body. Now back to Kluver and Busey's monkey experiments. So Heinrich Kluver was a neuropsychologist, and he wanted to understand what this hallucinogen from a cactus actually did to the brain. So he wanted to see what part of the brain it affected. So he gave this chemical to a monkey named Aurora and surgically removed part of her left temporal lobe to examine under a microscope, and when she woke up, she was calm and tame, totally different from before. She showed hypersexual behavior and increased appetite. She used her mouth to feel things like a baby, even though she was an adult. She didn't apply meaning to visual stimuli. Some of these changes were permanent, some disappeared over time. Now, can this happen to people? In rare cases, yes. Herpes encephalitis or autoimmune disorders can actually cause brain damage that can result in these similar symptoms, although it's very rare. And the full extent of symptoms seen in the monkeys isn't expected in people if they sustain an injury, because it's not very likely for that specific area of the brain and that whole area of the brain to be damaged. The first documented case of this in a human was in 1955. A 19-year-old male was treated for violent behavior and seizures. He showed an increased appetite, no fear towards anything, hypersexual behavior, and unfortunately he was put into a nursing home. But this shows how the amygdala is not specific to only fear. It had all of these other effects, so that shows the interconnectedness of the whole brain system and allows us to study further this topic. So what can we do when this normal response to fear seems like it's overwhelming and out of control? The psychologist Daniel Goleman coined the term the amygdala hijack, when your fight or flight response is so keyed up that it kind of overcomes the logical reasoning of your frontal lobe. That's why people with anxiety are prescribed drugs a lot of the time that kind of slow down that brain function so they can regain their logical thinking and control. Ways you can help with this: try to understand what stresses you out in your environment and minimize it if you can. Controlled breathing really calms you down, activates that parasympathetic nervous system, kind of a cool down. If you understand that your feelings aren't logical, it allows you to kind of calm down and then take on a logical approach to your problem. And then what happens when you're calming down that parasympathetic nervous system, your heart rate and blood pressure are decreasing, your blood's going back to your digestive system, endorphins or natural painkillers are released by your brain, your amygdala calms down so your frontal lobe can reason. This can all happen by just calm, deep breathing. It has a huge physical effect. To kind of summarize everything, there is a very physical response happening in your body. It's not just in your head when you're responding to a fearful stimulus. Your central nervous system, you're receiving this information, you're distinguishing that it's a threat. There's a whole process that's activated. Your peripheral nervous system takes action. You're pumped full of fear hormones so that you're able to react and get yourself out of that situation. This process, there's huge interconnection going on in your entire body. There's also a whole system in place to calm you down, reset everything after the stimulus is over. There's a very real harmful effect of too much stress, as we saw with the cortisol and inflammation. But relaxation and deep breathing can really help you manage this. It has a huge effect on your entire body, and it helps you be able to logically reason better. Then here are all my sources. And then I did want to thank Dr. Smoloski. She gave me wonderful scientific resources, encouragement, and kept me accountable through checkpoints throughout the semester to complete this project.